Now, we have discussed a lot of stories through the course, and obviously every time we have done something like that, we have invoked a fair amount of history. This again takes us back to the year of 2008. It's a very interesting story. Now, the global financial crisis hits in the year 2008. The governments start borrowing heavily because fiscal policy has to kick in. It's a time of crisis. The debt starts exploding. Policymakers start panicking, right? They think that if the debt to GDP ratio will suddenly explode, they have no idea what will happen. They all want a number, a red line, basically a warning sign. So in 2010, two famous economists, Reinhardt and Rogoff, they publish a paper, and in that paper, the claim is bold. The claim is that if your debt to GDP ratio is above 90%, then your economic growth will collapse. It won't slow down, it will collapse. It's a bold claim. So that gave the policymakers a definite red line, that maintain debt to GDP ratio of about 90%. And if it is around that, then it is something that is okay, it is safe. But the moment it starts crossing that, then the growth will ultimately just collapse. These researchers obviously were looking at data, and they had derived some theoretical model and done some simulations and arrived at this number, this final threshold number of 90%. Obviously, because there is just one number around this time period when everywhere the debt to GDP ratio is exploding, this research spreads fast. Everybody from the IMF to the finance ministries to the European Union, etc., everybody just embraces that number. And the headlines are, if we have crossed 90%, we must cut. We must cut our deficit spending. That goes on about for few years. In 2013, a PhD student in the US tries to replicate the result of this paper. This was just a class assignment, and he wanted to replicate the results, meaning that he wanted to run the same analysis on the same data and arrive at same results. But as he is doing his class assignment, he is not getting those numbers. The numbers don't match up. Now, obviously, Reinhardt, Rogoff are prominent economists, so the student naturally thinks that maybe he is doing something wrong. So he emails the authors, and they send him the original Excel file in which they had done the analysis. He opens the Excel file and he finds a problem in the formula. You know in Excel that when you select some rows, right, the dollar sign, and for example, you're selecting from column F, row number 60 to column, let's say J, row number 2895, right, all that dollar sign comes in. That's a range that the Excel is picking up, a formula is picking up that entire range of data. When this student opens up that Excel sheet, he finds that that formula is actually missing out on entire rows of data that was below. There were many rows of data, there were many data points that Excel formula failed to capture. And these were countries that actually had high debt and high growth cases that were never counted in the original analysis. When he fixes that error in the formula and he reruns the number, then the threshold of 90% just disappears, and the main result of the paper collapses. The new result is that if you have high debt, it is not as if the economic growth will just collapse. It's going to be a little messy, but context will also matter. There's going to be a lot of context dependency to the whole thing. There is no universal rule that one can arrive at. And this became a big news at that point in time. I remember I was doing my PhD at that point in time, and this was a fascinating piece of news which basically inspired us as PhD students to not really take any research with just pure sacred attribute. Verify everything. Because for long, the world had basically chased a threshold that only lived inside a spreadsheet error. For a few years, global fiscal policy rested on a misplaced Excel cell. And that is the fascinating story I wanted to tell before recapping this module. All right, so now we have covered fiscal policy from first principles. where governments get money from, how do they spend it, what happens when they borrow, and when fiscal expansion makes sense. Let's wrap it up with some key takeaways and questions to think about. One, fiscal policy is a powerful tool, but a slow one at that. It can stabilize collapsing economies, but it takes time to design, approve, and execute these projects. Second, quality matters more than the quantity. Borrowing to invest in infrastructure is smart, borrowing to fund consumption is risky. Third, debt sustainability depends on growth, not just the debt ratio. If you are growing faster than your interest rates, your debt is manageable. Otherwise, there is going to be some risk and it may become a trap. Fourth, fiscal space, your ability to borrow, is a luxury. Countries that manage their budgets well in good times have more room to spend in crisis. Countries that run chronic deficits, they lose credibility and they can't borrow when it matters the most. And lastly, fiscal and monetary policy coordination is useful, but the central bank must remain independent. The RBI controls the inflation, the government controls the spending. Ideally, both should communicate, but RBI shouldn't be pressured to print money to fund deficit, which in normal years that is never the case. But independence of central bank is crucial to the working of monetary policy. That is fiscal policy. It's messy, political, and deeply consequential. And that brings us to the end of this segment.